Now we are going to discuss Chapter 5, General Considerations in Assessment of Language in Infants and Preschool Children. Your book does a fantastic job with this chapter, so I will be referencing tables and figures throughout the lecture. So please have your book out and be ready to stop and look at different charts as I reference them. So what are the four purposes of assessment? Why do we do assessment? What do we want to find out? You went over this also in your clinical methods class. Stop the video now and write down a list of the reasons of why we do assessments. Let's see how your list matches up. First, we do an assessment to see if the individual has a delay or disorder, or is it just a difference? Second, the assessment helps us find out if the client meets eligibility criteria for services. In order to get services reimbursed by a third-party payer like Medicaid or insurance, the child's difficulties have to meet eligibility criteria for a disorder for intervention to be covered. Third, the assessment helps us determine the individual's strengths and weaknesses. What are they good at? What do they have trouble with? What skills do they have or not have that they need for school readiness? Fourth, the assessment results helps the SLP determine recommendations. Do you want to recommend therapy, or do you think a referral to a different resource would be more appropriate? For example, if you have a child that suspects of having autism, then you want the child referred to a team. If you have a child who you suspect has ADHD, then the child will need to go to a psychologist or a pediatric doctor to have them looked at and assessed more closely. Because, of course, these areas are outside your scope of practice and language. I do want you to remember that your assessment is only one snapshot in the photo album of a child's life. Now think about your driver's license picture. How many of you like your driver's license picture? Not me. Would you like to have that blown up and put in a frame in your home for people to look at? I bet 90% of you would say absolutely not. So if we happen to take a snapshot of a child and it comes out like your driver's license picture, then we didn't get a good snapshot of the child. So you have to talk to the parent or caregiver so they can give you what the whole photo album looks like. The parent can say, this wasn't a good snapshot. They give us other information of things the child can do that we did not get to see in our snapshot. Or the parent might say, you got a great snapshot. You're only seeing a child for an assessment for about 1 to 2 hours. And in those 1 to 2 hours, you have to determine, is there a disorder or delay? Are they eligible for services? What are they good at? And what are they having difficulties with? And do I need to refer them for anything else? So it's a quick decision making time for you as the clinician. It might seem daunting, but it's definitely doable. So let's think about some questions here. Why not wait and see? And then how will we distinguish this from a disorder or or as a delay? So let's pretend you just assessed a 2.5-year-old and found out he is behind in his expressive skills and there are no other big red flags. Should your recommendation to be just wait and see? You know, a lot of times I hear parents say that their pediatrician said, oh, he's just a little bit behind, he'll grow out of it. But to be conservative, I will often recommend intervention if the evidence from my evaluation warrants it. The research has proven that the longer intervention is delayed, the further the child has to catch up. So when children are in early intervention, we see that the child can get back on the right track much quicker and much faster than without intervention. Intervention really does close that gap. And then the other question is, how are you going to distinguish a disorder from a delay? Hopefully it will be a delay and the child will catch up with intervention. But it could be a disorder. And how do we figure this out? So let me give you another example to help explain. Think about when a teacher gave you a class assignment as a college student, and when she was going over it, you feel like you understood exactly what to do. But when you get home, you think to yourself, I have no earthly idea what I'm supposed to do. And so you go back in and you talk to the teacher, and the teacher says, here's what you do. And then you go, now I get it. And you go home and you do the assignment just fine. Then that would have been an example of delay. You just needed some extra intervention to help you get the concept and what you needed to do. But if you went back in and the teacher explains it to you, and again, you go home and you go, I still have no earthly idea what to do. I just don't get this at all. And you continue to need lots of help and support, then that would be more of an example of a disorder. This is what you can see in young children. We cannot determine a disorder from a delay until we see how they respond to intervention. If the child picks up on things quickly and starts moving forward and goes quickly through their goals, that child would probably just be delayed. The child who continues to struggle and continues to need support, though, is a child who would be labeled as having a disorder. So now think about this question. What language skills do we assess? So think about it, answer it here just a second. Hopefully you answered all 5 components of language. You're going to cover everything in content, form, and use. No matter what the parent's chief complaint is, in an initial assessment, an SLP will always look at semantics, morphology, syntax, phonology, and pragmatics. With this young age, we will also have to look at their interaction skills. Remember the pre-linguistic skills discussed in the ASD chapter, such as reciprocal interaction, initiating interactions, and joint attention? We want to make sure the child is exhibiting these skills as well as the 5 components of language. Even though you learn more about this in your speech sound disorders class, I also want to mention that we will make sure and collect a phonological repertoire to make sure the child is saying all of the sounds they should. If not, then we will add articulation phonological testing to our language battery. We will also conduct an oral mechanism exam to make sure that the oral mechanism structures and functions are within normal limits. We will also screen for voice, influency, and any other component of communication as warranted. So how do we gather information on these language skills? We're going to use the case history. We're going to use observation, norm reference assessments, and criterion reference assessments. First, we gather case history information from looking at the case history form that the parent should fill out prior to the evaluation, looking at other reports from doctors or other therapists, and asking the parents case history questions during an interview at the beginning of the assessment. As soon as we meet the child and the family, we are making observations. As soon as I walk out in that waiting room, how do they interact? What is the parent's communication style? How does the child respond and communicate with the parents and others? We will then interact with the child and maybe with the parents and the child, if they are younger, to observe the child's skills. After playing for a while, we will begin with any norm reference and criterion reference assessments. Remember from your clinical methods class that norm reference assessments are ones that compare the child to a norm. They usually have a stimulus manual in which you ask the child to point to pictures or expressively answer questions. Criterion reference assessments look to see if the child meets certain criteria. It does not compare the child to other children. We will talk some more examples of each a little bit later. So now let's talk about the diagnostic process. Your book does a great job in applying the scientific model to the assessment process. Here are the 7 steps to the assessment process. First, we define the problem. Second, we develop a hypothesis. Third, we plan the assessment. Fourth, we collect the data. Fifth, we analyze the data. Sixth, we interpret the data. And seventh, we make conclusions and give recommendations. To help us find what the problem might be, we are going to first look at the case history form that the parent filled out. We're going to look for important information and any information we will want to clarify when we talk to the parent. If we have access to other professionals' reports, we will also review those. From this research, we are going to define what we think the problem is. Are they not talking enough, not understanding others, not interacting, or not saying sounds correctly? Your book in the appendix has an example of a case history form, which is Appendix 5B. So look at that, and then also you should have gone over case history forms and case history interviews in your clinical methods class. After we have gathered data and feel like we have an idea of the problem the child is having, we develop a hypothesis of what skills we expect the child to do and not to do. If I felt like the problem was that the child was not expressing what he should for a 2-year-old, my hypothesis could be that he might have a limited vocabulary and not be combining words. Based on the hypothesis, we need to first determine what we want to assess language-wise at this preschool age. Because of their young age, you have to look at social interaction, pre-linguistic skills such as initiation, turn-taking, joint attention, and nonverbal communication skills. Of course, you have to look at receptive and expressive language in the areas of the 5 components of language: semantics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and pragmatics. Lastly, you have to look at their play skills. I say that the preschooler's job is to play. Because this is a foundational skill, language, and that is imperative for future social communication and language and academic development, we have to make sure that their play with others and symbolic play skills are on target. Next, we have to plan out the specific assessment measures. How are we going to assess the hypothesis problem skills? For a preschooler, we might or might not get to administer a norm reference test. As a general rule, children under the age of 3 are going to have difficulty conditioning to the administration procedures of a norm reference test. These tests are going to require that the child sit at a table or at least sit still in front of the clinician and do tasks when asked. Some kids might not even want to sit at the table or sit with the clinician. A lot of them, they're just way too busy. I will often plan the norm reference assessments I would like to use, but have backups if the child cannot do the tasks. The most common preschool language tests are the PLS, or the Preschool Language Scale, and the Self-Preschool, or the Comprehensive Evaluation of Language Fundamentals Preschool. Your book gives the names of other tests, the ages they assess, and what they assess in Appendix 5E. The PLS is for children from birth to age 6. It is divided into 2 sections, the receptive section and the expressive section, and is organized in each by developmental age. The clinician gives the receptive part and then the expressive part to find their language functioning in each. In the infant years, it looks at skills like, does the child make sounds? Does the child look at you? How do they interact? As the child gets older, it looks at receptive skills like identifying common objects, like in colors, or identifying pronouns. For older expressive tasks, it will ask things like, What do you do if your hands are dirty? The preschool language, or the self preschool, is for children ages 3 to 6 years, 11 months of age, and is organized a little differently than the PLS. It looks at different areas of language in separate subtests, and these subtests include concepts and following directions, word structure, expressive vocabulary, recalling sentences, sentence structure, basic concepts, recalling sentences in context, word classes, and phonological awareness. Besides the norm reference tests, we have criterion reference measurements. Remember, these assessments look to see if the child meets certain criteria. These will be used if you need more detailed information on the strengths and weaknesses of a child in a certain area, or skills cannot be assessed via a norm referenced assessment. For example, if you conduct the PLS and the child does not pass the questions for identifying colors, you would then construct a criterion reference assessment to determine exactly which colors the child does or does not know. Also, based on your hypothesis and the information you already know from the case history, there might be specific skills you want to try and elicit from the child specifically during the evaluation. If a child is reported to not use many words, I would try some different dynamic assessment elicitation techniques to see the different strategies and supports. Can the child produce any words? I might see if the child will participate in social routines, for example. One of the most common use of criterion reference assessments at the preschool age during initial evaluation is to take a language sample and analyze it for the 5 components of language based on the child's level. You learned how to elicit a language sample in your language development class, so we will not go into specifics here. After I obtain my language sample, the criterion reference assessments I might plan to do based off the language sample could be assessing functions and means of communication. So, how do they communicate? Is it gestures? Is it conventional gestures? And then also, what are the functions? Why are they wanting to communicate with me? Are they just requesting, or are they greeting? Do they comment? Then also, we're going to collect a phonemic repertoire. We can also analyze the language sample for Brown's 14 grammatical morphemes. Of course, we can calculate mean length of utterance, or MLU, and then we can conduct a semantic analysis, and then if they're at the 2-word level, we could do a semantic relations analysis. The other criterion reference assessment at the preschool age are developmental checklists. These are published checklists, and the most common are the Rossetti Infant Toddler Language Scale, the Receptive Expressive Emergent Language Scale, or the REAL, the Communication and Symbolic Behavior Scales, so the CSBS, and the MacArthur Communication Development Inventory. These checklists obtain information by first just trying to observe the child naturally doing it. Second, by direct elicitation, by you getting down on the floor and trying to directly elicit the skills. And then if you can't get it the first 2 ways, then you will ask the parent if they have seen the child do this skill. Appendix 5A in your book is a good example of a developmental sequence of language. Go and stop the video for now and go take a look at this. Now that you're back, I'm going to ask you to leave again, that I want you to watch a video of this 3-year-old girl talking about Star Wars. I want you to think about what the adult had to do to get her to talk. Do you think it was very much? I can't give you a hint. I will tell you this is the type of kid that you would hope that you are going to get when you have to elicit a language sample. Have fun. She's really cute to watch. Now, there are other examples in your book I want to call your attention to. Appendix 5C. This is an example of a criterion reference symbolic play assessment. I really like this because they outline it very well and they even give you the different toys and materials that you're going to need to carry out the assessment. Gives you a good idea of something that you could create yourself or ones that you will find published out there. Appendix 5D is the early communication checklist via observation or parent report. Another good example of a criterion reference assessment. When determining the assessment battery, a clinician has to determine the very best test to assess what is needed. Just because a test has the word comprehension in it, it doesn't mean that it assesses receptive language. Just because it has language in the title, it doesn't mean that it will assess the areas of language that your child needs. You will learn a lot more in the diagnostics class in graduate school, but generally the two main areas that look at if a test is what it's saying it's doing is we look at validity and reliability. So validity is the degree to which a test measures what it is designed to measure and how well does it do. So if it says it's a language test, is it really testing all 5 components of language and how well does it test each component? Reliability is the consistency of a test in measuring what it claims to measure in the same individual on re-examination. So if I was to give this test multiple times to the child, how reliable is it? If it's a reliable test, they're going to score very similar within a certain range each time that I give the test. So for this class, you just need to know these 2 concepts and why it is important to read the test manual before choosing a test to administer. Okay, now think about this question. From having a child give you a language, from having a child giving you a language sample where they have a conversation with you, or you ask them to retell a story, what are the 5 things you can learn about a child's language from a language sample? If you gave any specific examples that would fall within the 5 components of language that you could observe or elicit from the child in a language sample, you are correct. So now we're going to plan the assessment. For your level, it's important for you to understand how we can elicit information either on a norm reference assessment or on a criterion reference assessment. Table 5-8 and Table 5-9 do a great job in explaining the type of tasks used in elicitation from the child, skills it is used for, and any potential limiting factors. Please stop the video now and go to these 2 charts now and to review this information. So now we're collecting the data. This is the actual testing of the client. Because of limited attention span, the clinician must be organized and efficient during the assessment session of these young kiddos. The order in which you do the tasks is also important. Just think, if I have limited time, I am probably going to want to do the tasks that I really want to get first, and then ones that are important but less important later on in the evaluation. So the assessments with a preschool are often play-based. I tell students that having the child think you are fun and enjoys being with you and interacting with you, that is really the biggest battle. Is I just want them to think that they're coming to play with Miss Lauren. Not that I'm really making them work, because as soon as they do at this age, they are probably going to quit interacting with me and I am not going to get any information. So sometimes, of course, we can't complete the planned criterion reference assessment with the child, much less norm reference assessments. What do you think we do? Take a second to think about this. First, you're going to try and complete your criterion reference assessments by report from the parent. If the kid just will not interact with you, is hanging on mom's leg, and will not even interact, it's much better to naturally observe the behavior, of course, or be able to elicit it, but the parent report is better than not finding out the information at all. So parent report is the most unreliable of the methods, of course. So if you do not get enough information to make a diagnosis, you can also leave trying to get specific criterion reference information during the initial therapy sessions. But of course, in this initial evaluation, you're wanting to get enough information either by observation, direct elicitation, or parent report to enough information to give you where you can make a diagnosis. Now take a second and pause the PowerPoint to watch a video of an administration of the PLS and then a second video of a play-based assessment. In the first video, the child does pretty well in doing what the clinician is asking. Notice that she does allow him to have toys in his hands while he's doing the tasks. The environment to me is fairly chaotic because mom is answering questions with one clinician while another clinician is administering the test with the child, and then the child's twin brother is also in the background. So even though it's chaotic, this is often very realistic to have this crazy type of environment in preschool. So yeah, so that's why I like this video. Then you will see a play-based assessment. Watch how first the clinician lets the child play and is not right up in front of his face. I think, she's probably just observing what he is doing without her intervening too much. I don't think her elicitation techniques are perfect. To be honest, but if she was watching a video of me, she would probably have some comments to say about me. So know that there are some things that I might recommend to do differently, but overall, I just wanted you to see a video of just a truly 100% play-based assessment. It looks like she's just playing, but the clinician is being very strategic about what she's doing and when she's doing it. Later in the video, you'll see her try to directly elicit more skills, such as symbolic play and some environmental sounds when she's playing with the teapot. So make sure and watch that. Throughout the video, you'll see her take notes, and then I know that she'll go back and watch the video to make more observations and obviously analyze the information from her play evaluation. So I want you to think about the difference between this child and the play-based and the first girl talking about Star Wars. Now she is, I think, probably older than he is, but again, these are both preschool children. So, there's not a huge age difference, but there is a big difference in their skills. So when collecting information from the child, the clinician must plan out how he or she is going to elicit the information from the child. Figure 5-1 in your book is a fantastic description, in my opinion. I'm going to use this for some of my other classes, definitely, or when I'm working with students in the clinic. I like it so much. So take a second to pause this video and look at this figure. So still on the same slide, for receptive tasks, it gives a continuum of what you should do from the most support from to the least support to get the child to identify the given item. For expressive tasks, it tells you the prompts to give to gain the most spontaneous answer that you can get. So if a child is not just spontaneously answering you, it gives you elicitation techniques such as the close procedure, identification, direct imitation. So for the quiz, I do expect you to really know all of you'll have to go back and reference probably a lot of these different charts and figures. So still, now we're going to analyze the data, and you go back and look at the data, and there you look at your norm referenced assessments where you're comparing to the normative sample in people who took the test when it was being developed, and you get those standard scores. Most norm reference assessments have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. So what that means that if the mean is 100, then any scores between 85 and 115 are considered within normal limits. So the test manual will give you procedures of how to score the test and analyze the child's performance. And if that is not the mean and the standard deviation, then it will spell everything out in the test manual. For the criterion reference assessment, of course, where you will compare the child to developmental norms or age-based standards, for one example, that you'll want to see how long their utterance is. So do they just have 3 words like daddy go bye-bye, or can they say, I want to go to the store tomorrow? And how many words do they use? Are they on age level, these skills? Can they produce those targets at age level? And then what specific skills do they have difficulty with? You would also add any observations you made to it. For your observations, you're using your knowledge of normal developmental standards to make judgments on what you're observing. For example, how is the child's response time when you ask her a question or command? What was her attention like compared to other girls her age? Does the mom not give enough pause time after asking a question? Or do you see the sibling totally talking for the child? As you're completing your analysis, you need to have the answers to these very important questions. Did you get a reliable and valid picture of the child? And this is your opinion, of course, but do you feel like you did? And was her behavior consistent with what the parents see at home? So sometimes I will get contradictory information of what parents are telling me every day that the child is doing at home and what I am seeing in the evaluation. Sometimes it's the child is not acting their normal because they are in a strange environment with strange people. But then sometimes I really do feel that that is an adequate picture of what I'm seeing that day, and the parents are a little unrealistic or not. Maybe they're giving the child a little bit too much credit or don't realize how many supports and routines they're using in the natural environment. But this is all things you learn over time to kind of that plays into this decision of answering these 2 questions. Now you have gotten all of your scores and your other data from your criterion, your observation, talking to the parents. It is time to interpret it and make some clinical decisions. Remember, there's a wide range of normal development. When looking at norm reference assessments, you have to read in the manual to see what scores are considered disordered. When looking at a bell curve, that's typically 1.5 standard deviations below the mean. Let me take a second here to stress the importance of not diagnosing a child just off of norm reference assessments. Bottom line, norm reference assessments do not give the full picture of a child's functioning. They're only a piece of the puzzle. A clinician has to look at the norm reference scores, criterion reference scores, reports from the parents, caregivers, teachers, if they're involved, and then any observations that from the natural environment, if we can. So if I'm a home health therapist, that's beautiful. I'm in the home. I can watch kind of normal communication with the family. Or if I'm working in a preschool or in the schools with the preschool kids, I can definitely see how they're interacting with peers. So you've interpreted the data and ready to discuss the findings and recommendations with the parent. You will usually discuss your initial findings, recommendations before the assessment is over with the younger children. After you've been able to fully analyze the data, you write up your report. The model for documentation we use is called the descriptive developmental model because it gives because just giving a label, of course, isn't enough and it's not descriptive. So if I tell you a child has a receptive and expressive delay, well, okay, that could mean anything, right? A child has autism or intellectual disability, that could mean anything also. So since there's such a variation of functioning and delays and disorders, you can't just use a label. So we have to use a descriptive developmental model in which we describe what the child can do and is exhibiting difficulty with. So you would say, Sam has a very strong vocabulary. He understands a lot of words, but his difficulty comes when he is expressing them. He currently has about 10 expressive words, and we should have at least 50 and beginning to combine words at his age of 27 months. So at this time, Sam is exhibiting an expressive language delay. So this gives us way more information than just saying expressive language delay. When you complete your assessment and you write it up, remember you're going to look at all the areas of communication, not just language. So I'm just trying to remind you a big picture here. So of course we'll comment on voice and fluency, speech sound production, oral motor functioning, hearing, all of this besides our language. But because this is the language disorders class, of course, I've only given examples of language, but just wanted to make sure you remember as we're talking about writing up the report that you will talk about all areas of communication in the report. So, something like voice and then fluency for a little one might not even be applicable, but you will still have a section for voice and fluency, and you would just say a quick statement of, they're judged to be within normal limits or something like that. We are now finished with the information for preschool assessment. You should have a good idea of the process now for planning and implementing an assessment at this age. Your practice and assignment for this module is to calculate MLU. This is a skill that is a must at this level. You should have learned how to do this in your language development class. So I'm not going into detail in the PowerPoint of how to do this, but I will have the procedures again in with your assignment. So if you have any questions, make sure and email me. You're going to have a practice assignment this week, and then you will have an assignment where you do more due the next week. So make sure and we'll get feedback back to you this week before you do the other assignment next week. So, all right, have fun, and I will see you next week.